Yes, he did. Donnybrook is made possible by the support of the Betsy and Thomas Patterson Foundation and the members of 9PBS.
Well, if it's Thursday, this must be Donnybrook. Thanks so much for joining us. We've got lots to talk about, so let's first meet the panelists. From the Big 550 KTRS, Wendy Wiese.
You've been gone a while.
I recognize you. Jacob Kirn is sitting in for the vacationing Bill McClellan. Jacob Kirn, of course, with the St. Louis Business Journal. Welcome back, Jacob. Ray Hartmann. Ray Hartmann, of course, one of our founders, and now he's with Substack. Ray Hartmann's St. Louis Insider is his column. And from the St. Louis American, Mr. Alvin Reid. Hey, we're going to start with you, Jacob, by the way. Welcome back. Thanks so much. You had a story this week taking a look at Governor Mike Parson's vetoes, $53 billion budget. And he cut about $500 million out this past week, 201 vetoes. He took out money for the Brickline Walkway in downtown St. Louis, $40 million out of the Allied Health Center for St. Louis Community College, money out of Kinlock building demolitions. The Kirkwood Community Center took $3 million out of that. Also, nerve. $10 or so million out of repairs for our 911 system. Did he go too far? What do you think?
Well, it was interesting, too, because there were all kinds of small projects. I mean, MSD had millions of dollars cut, as if our sewer bills aren't high enough already. And the Gospel Museum, those churches in the Central West End that want to be redeveloped for that museum. So there really were kind of a staggering number of projects. But then there were a lot of projects in outstate places, too. I mean, dozens and dozens of them. I mean, maybe not for as high a dollar amount, but I kind of stepped back and thought and was like, well, if it's proportional to population or to GDP or economic power, maybe it was kind of right in terms of what you had to cut from to get to what he was calling a more fiscally responsible place. Well, because he's saying, look, the budget moving forward is not going to be as rosy as it is now with this federal money running out. There could be a recession.
But the 911 that cuts, those reductions, and then the sewer cuts, that to me, that leaves St. Louis in an even more precarious spot than we are right now. And for somebody who was so concerned about the circuit attorney's office, I mean, this is in terms of public safety, public health. That's right up there, isn't it, in your opinion?
Well, and yet he kept the money in for the symphony.
Well, but
for our neighbors here in Grand Center, the St. Louis Symphony Orchestra.
You have to wonder sometimes what's the personal connection or what's the reason? And it's because it's not clear from the veto letter. It just says we want to keep. Yeah.
And I would say this, that there's an occupational hazard to being called governor when your party's against government. Okay, and that's really they're against. I agree with your analysis that it probably, we don't know yet how proportionally worse it is in St. Louis than anywhere else, but apologize for my voice. But the bigger question is we're not having services provided because the Republican Party is against services.
And you can't make that case, Ray,
that's really not
because
true.
the city city has the Cronky money, and it has $500 million in federal money.
And is a Democratic stronghold.
We are.
I was going to say that. You guys, you guys, everybody, you beat me to my point. I was going to say, like, hey, I've been wanting to sit here and say, like, look, just because that money is there, that does not mean just start spending it. I get that part, and we were talking about that as far as the city was concerned. So with the state, I can't go all in on, just because you got, this money that it instantly needs to just go to every project. I will say that some of the ones that were earmarked, that, what do we have a shortage of, not only in St. Louis, Missouri, and nationwide, is a shortage of healthcare workers. And that's what that money was for St. Louis Community College. And so I look at that one and I said, like, now here's a acute problem, not only here, but everywhere. Why target that?
Well, here's the thing.
I think I can explain it.
I think Kansas City is kicking our tail because they have a mayor that everybody likes, Quentin Lucas, is that his name?
Yep.
And he is a glad-hander. He walks into a room and is smiling and is everybody's friend. Then they got a guy there named Greg Razor. He's a state senator. He's got more money for his district, $400 million, than the entire city of St. Louis combined. He got $300 million just for one hospital, speaking of health care. So you have to go to Jeff City and say, okay, you Republicans, you are my friend.
Well, I think Tishaura Jones
That's way
has
oversimplified.
said that, you know, she has a decent enough relationship with the governor. She was able to kill these attacks on the city and kind of credited her lobbying team and her relationships with Jefferson City. So the case has been made that
Charlie,
our relationship is at least
you're not
living up
reading
with the
the
Republicans.
Yeah.
She was
Charlie.
a state rep.
Charlie, you're not reading the Kansas City Star much because they don't view that relationship quite as warm as you do. And keep in mind, Tishaura Jones was a member of the Missouri legislature. She's got lots of good contacts. I think that's way, to pick out Greg Razor, who's a fine state senator, that's way oversimplified.
Well, let's get to the
Way
911 money. And I thought that was questionable that in this day and age, that money would be cut out of the St. Louis budget. Wendy, Wiese, we had another horrific example of how poor the 911 system is in St. Louis City and apparently the county. In the county, a tree fell on a 5-year-old boy in Jennings, and according to those nearby, they called 911 and could not get results. The same thing happened on Choteau near the Grove in St. Louis on Saturday. 33-year-old woman in her car, in it while a tree fell on her. And then the local merchants and her friends said they called 911, and they didn't even answer for a half an hour, maybe 45 minutes. Now, I've heard of 911 problems, but I've never heard in any city in the country where 911 is not answered. It's not answered within a minute or two.
Right.
But here, they don't answer it at all. And I've said on this program that happened to my wife, Beth. It happened to one of St. Louis's top authors, Diana Rademacher. This is unbelievable.
It is unbelievable, especially when you think that this is not something that has just popped up. I mean, this is something that we've been discussing for several years. The will doesn't seem to be there to connect all of the dots because there, at least according to the, like in press conferences, they will say that, we are going to increase the number of, EMS operators. We're going to do something about the bottleneck between the police, the EMS, the fire, and that kind of thing. But nothing is happening in terms of the numbers. And meanwhile, this young woman, 33 years old, she went to Rockwood Summit. She graduated from Webster University. Her family is asking that her death not be politicized. And, nobody's trying to politicize her death, but this is an issue that has got to be solved because we're making national news. We continue to make national news for all the wrong reasons.
An overused phrase is zero tolerance. We ought to have zero tolerance for the next one of these. And I'm not politicizing it, certainly. I'm not even sure who's at fault. We heard whether it's state, city, whatever. But we have so many issues we cover every night, every week, week in, week out, year in, year out. This is absolutely intolerable, and it shouldn't be. There shouldn't be another one. I don't know how else to say it.
How many medical emergencies? While she was dying, and they were saying that she was slipping away. How many other medical emergencies?
Can't be one more of these.
They're saying 2026 to get the unified system, right?
How many
but the federal money, the Rams money, is locked away. Why?
Why exactly? Why not?
Why would it be
There you go.
2026? The RFPs should go out today. I mean, one death is too many.
Absolutely.
Well, I think you need somebody in charge, just kind of like Gabe Gore. All right, you may have political aspirations, you may not, but just get this thing back together. I think that could be done with 911. I am not making any excuse for anybody because I was out of town when this storm roared through. So usually you have a sense of how bad it was and what's going on out there. I wasn't here. I will say that in this instance, it is possible that they were inundated with 911 calls from everything, from there's water coming in my house to there's a limb hanging on my electric line. It hasn't snapped yet, but everybody's dialing 911. Maybe we need just a little bit of education on when to call 911 and when
fair
not.
point, although 911 often doesn't work when the weather's nice.
I agree.
But I like your point. You mentioned that Gabe Gore, the new circuit attorney, has called the best and the brightest to lend the city a year of service or whatever it is to get the job done after Kim Gardner has left office. Maybe the mayor, who probably has no experience in 911 communications, should say to one of the many semi-retired businessmen who've run operations and met payrolls, okay, Richard Mark from Ameren, Illinois, you got to head up the commission on 911, or it's David Stewart, or it's Danny Ludeman from Wells Fargo, or somebody. Bring in people
And in
who,
fact, the circuit attorney's office has brought business executives.
That's what we're
sent
saying.
in.
Yes.
I mean, that makes sense to me. And I think it was Sarah. Well, no, and I think Sarah was who said, like, okay, that's the non-starter for living in the city. And I'm not that I, had planned to move, and I don't mean that in a, a mean-spirited way, but I am saying that never mind crime, never mind this, never mind that. The thing is that if I fall down my own steps and break my hip, I need an ambulance to be there like in 5 minutes.
Right.
I am not, or something happened to one of my kids when they were little. Oh no, that's just like, no, I can't live there.
Well, I'll tell you something that might say something about the way that the city works too, because I live on the hill and I often have to get cars taken away from the front of my driveway. They're there immediately.
Yeah, because you're on the
I
hill.
mean, they're there in 20 minutes or less.
And it's really...
those fans can be a problem.
It's it's not just people who live in a city, but people who work in a city. I mean, when you're talking about people who come to a game in a city, it's just got to be zero.
What if the
tolerance.
Washington Post or New York Times was sending like their travel writer to St. Louis last week? Let's hope they didn't.
Well,
okay.
All right.
We're not
Alvin,
the
I want
only
to ask
city
you.
with problems.
No, that's true. Other cities do have problems. I have not heard of another city where they don't answer 911.
That's a bad one.
Where a young woman was a double amputee. On the heels of that, to have a 33-year-old woman with her groceries in her car, as bystanders do everything they can to help, and they're telling the operators that.
Meanwhile, real quick, in Kirkwood, we had a little coyote thing going on, and they actually put out fly like, don't call 911 if you see a coyote. That's how, like I said, because they were having to respond to all these coyotes.
Wait times did go up in Denver. I happened to see that headline recently.
Yeah, don't assume we're the only people that have this.
Alvin, Reid, I want to ask you about a story that was broken by KSDK. They looked at some of the texts between the mayor, her father, Vervis Jones, and political operative Richard Callow. And they found out through these texts that after Kim Gardner, the circuit attorney, had announced that she was leaving office, that the mayor and the others did not want Steve Roberts, Missouri lawmaker, to get that job, and they were going to coordinate efforts to prevent him from getting it. They also found out that David Stewart, the aforementioned former CEO of oh gosh, what's his Worldwide Technology. That's right. I hate to forget the billionaires' jobs. But that he actually played a role in Gabe Gore getting that job. But what did you think of the text? Were they untoward and inappropriate?
No, if Alvin Reid were mayor, that would be what you heard from Alvin Reid every 5 minutes. Except, I'm not tweeting and I'm not whatever. Whoever I needed to say something to, I would say it to them. But I think if you're a detractor of the mayor, you say like, oh, well, this is that and the other thing. And I just think that, I honestly think if it was a man who did it, people say like, well, that's just how he talks. And I think you look at a woman who's married and she's like, she shouldn't be talking like that. And I just think, I don't think it's...
Trump's language was parsed pretty closely. I mean,
true, but I didn't mind Donald Trump because he cussed people out. I got 11 million reasons why I don't like Donald Trump, and foul language is not one of them. Well, except for the one thing,
Yeah, like, the Billy Bush.
Yeah, that thing.
Right, that was pretty foul.
Yeah.
I think the mayor when she came into office, it was, black girl magic and just sort of a sisterhood, if you will. So to hear her throwing around some of the words, some of the pejoratives that she was throwing around about women, while not surprising in the world today of politics, she is our leader. And I think that we should require hope, at least, for more from her, thank you, in that regard.
One of the things that's really interesting in the text, well, I guess maybe it's not a big surprise. Politicians, what they're thinking is not what they're saying in public, because there's all these messages from her that are about Kim Gardner, and she's talking to Vervis and she's talking to Richard, and there'll be a news story where it's, you know, something about Kim Gardner's office, and Tishaura is weighing in and saying, that one plus 3,000. You know, it's criticism on Kim that we were not seeing publicly.
Well, she did
Again,
react
not
today.
surprising, and that's why you would hope.
In a message today, she claimed that Channel 5 had combed through her texts and made up this story. But I didn't find anything unlawful about what she did. And I'm not really shocked.
If you say, don't sunshine my phone to reporters on a radio station, then aren't you asking for it?
Well, wait a minute. Can I follow up on that? Because why don't you youngsters all gather around as the only founder here? I think we've been on the air maybe 2 or 3 months in 1987 when a senator named Gary Hart said to the world,
"Follow me,
follow me, or tail me." I think put a tail on me, is what he said. And we were this was one of the very early shows. I remember we talked about that, so it kind of took me back as an old timer. But anyway, I would say this, that if Tishaura Jones' career ended today, she has a great political career. If she wants to take it to the next level, and it's not about language, she needs to be able to rise above, I think. I mean, certainly being involved is totally appropriate in the circuit attorney selection. That's all fine. There's no, I think it would be, I think she could really be something special, but it can't, if those texts didn't look good. It didn't look like somebody who was rising above the fray. And I think she could, that's my thought.
Oh, okay. Let me ask you, Jacob, about Jim Edmonds and some comments that he made in a broadcast recently. Of course, everyone knows that Jim Edmonds is the Cardinals great who's now doing the analysis along with Mr. Carey.
The Game 6 catch.
Yeah,
yes.
There you go. So in a recent broadcast, he said that the Cleveland Indians name never bothered him, nor did Washington Redskins.
He invoked his newer wife, who apparently has Native American heritage as well.
That's right. That's right. So he kind of weighed in on this topic, and it wasn't a huge local story, but it actually made the national papers, Sports Illustrated, for example. And I'm just wondering, did he step into it, Jim Edmonds, this time? Is he in trouble?
Well, apparently not for locals in St. Louis, because I haven't seen a whole lot of blowback. But I'll tell you, from my perspective, he has been, for his personal life, in tabloids dozens and dozens and dozens of times, which I guess I just happen to be the one reading those. So I have seen about enough from Jim Edmonds in terms of the comments, and because I've already seen, yeah, the police are at the house and the divorce and it's just enough. I've kind of had enough, to be honest.
Yeah, when I was at Baseball Weekly, okay, we didn't want to run the Brennan Indian logo that the Indians had, okay, Chief Wahoo. And we got told by basically Major League Baseball, like, no, run the Brennan Indian and don't run Indian logos at all. Okay, now this was in the early 90s. I think that's why it was they got rid of that. But I think that's why the Indians' name also went. I don't have a problem with the Chiefs. I don't have a problem with the Braves. I did have a big problem with the Redskins. So I don't know if I'm being, critical of one and not the other, or where I stand on that. But I think everyone has their limit, and Redskins was beyond it, but Braves and Chiefs are okay. You asked earlier about the chop before we were on, and I said that's got to go. Now, if I was the commissioner of Major League Baseball or the National Football League, I would say, like, yeah, chop during the game, and it's a 15-yard penalty. I
think society has kind of litigated this. Yeah. This is over. I mean,
that's a good point.
The idea that they always want to present these polls of all the different groups, and well, there are some groups that don't care. Even if it's the minority and they do care, it's hurtful to them. Like, it's just time to move on.
I don't know how hurtful it really is in the long run, to use the term Indians anyway. Redskins, I do believe that's a pejorative. But I sometimes believe that these issues are media creations.
But wait, now if an individual entity, a baseball team, a football team, whatever team, decides that we're going to change our name. They got a reason for doing it, and it's not because people just decided, like, we don't like you anymore.
I don't think it's
no, there's a bottom.
Of the media.
And there's a whole group of people that call themselves guardians. They're probably not objecting to Cleveland Guardians.
Those are on the bridge, by the way.
Exactly.
There's a reason they named them the Guardians.
I'm with, Jacob. Just really, that's the last word. No, I mean, you're right. It's yesterday's issue, and it's somebody that really doesn't need a lot of attention from us, in my opinion.
Okay.
Who cares what he thinks?
In matters of race and ethnicity, the Supreme Court of the United States ruled that you can't use race in admissions. In a case involving two schools, Harvard and North Carolina. The mayor of St. Louis, Tishaura Jones, she's getting her time on the show tonight. She said, let's be clear, it's a racist decision. Do you believe that's the case, Ray?
I certainly don't begrudge her that term, but I would say this, that it's not, the way I look at it, and I'm probably going to write about this again, is I did a piece called Blinded by the White. The only affirmative action in this country is for white people. The only bias in hiring, in admissions, is white people. I always said this during minority contracts. There's two kinds of contractors. There's minority contractors, which is people of color and some women, and then what's the other one called? Contractors. It's a given. I always thought that, for example, in minority contracts, which is much like affirmative action, it's not a racial demand, it's a counteroffer. The first demand is by 100% of the business goes to white men, okay? And then the minority contractors come in with a 20% counteroffer. It's the same way with Harvard. You know, it used to be all white people, okay? And then over time, you know, it has become an effort to simply level the playing field a little bit, and we just don't accept that white is a race.
But you can't do that in the United States, where the Constitution says you can't discriminate based on race.
First of all, the Constitution had the Slave Act in it. It had black people being 3/5 of a people.
So you don't believe that then?
No, I don't
as
think.
As the former board member of the ACLU, you don't believe that?
I do believe it, but I'm thinking that all these people, you know, the Constitution, 3 out of the 5 members who wrote it were owned slaves.
If you're going to give one race a preference,
we
then
do it.
You allow someone else to give another race a preference.
We give it to white people, and then everything else is a counteroffer.
What about the idea that you know, the will of the people? Because even in very liberal California, overwhelmingly failed several years ago.
Well, several times.
Yeah. And I thought it was wrong then. I think it's wrong now. As long as you're talking about qualified people, now I'm not talking about just racial quotas. I mean, if you're talking about qualified people, the idea of institutions, whether they be businesses, and they're going to be next, whether it be schools, for them to want to diversify and to take into account race as a factor, I think is perfectly reasonable.
This was about Asian students.
Well, that's what the lawsuit was about.
Right.
It was filed by somebody that had heat. Right. Anytime anything like this happens, now this is where I kind of get on my soapbox. This is about black people and white people. Okay, God bless brown people and Asian people and every other kind of people.
They weren't brought over here.
I respectfully disagree on that.
I'm just telling you, in my mind, I've always thought that this always comes down to that. Because for the most part, I think those that are concerned really don't care about other people, okay? And I will say this, the decision was not racist, it was racial, but also, as my wife and I kind of just said, like, look, if black people, big business, couldn't get around this kind of thing, where would black people be right now? So rather than just throw your hands up in the air and act all crazy, let's get on to the next thing. Harvard, you'll figure it out. North Carolina, you'll figure it out. Right. And so it'll get figured out.
They will. I think what they'll do is start awarding points as opposed to skin color. They'll give it based on class or struggle, hardship, something like that.
Oh, by the way, the whole legacy thing,
yeah,
I want to file that lawsuit.
They already filed it.
But you talk about the peas start hopping because the water's hot.
Until your grandkids go to KU. Okay.
Yeah, you're right. Good call.
That's
Didn't
right.
have to be grandkids.
Hey, Ray Hartmann, we only have about 2 minutes to go. 2-minute warning. And Steve Ehlmann, a long-time county executive for St. Charles, announced that he's not going to run for re-election in 2026. I think he's done a great job. What say you?
Yeah, I do. I mean, Steve and I are friends. We've had very different politics.
Problem.
Yeah, it is. He probably would like that cut out of the show. I think he's a fine job. He is, I think it's a sign of the times. He's a real Republican, not only a person of integrity, but a person of principle. I happen to disagree with a lot of those principles, and it's possible that two people that are principled can disagree with one another. At least it should be. I think his time, it's sad that his time, he feels his work is done, but good for him that he's leaving.
He puts the region first, which is really interesting, not his own fiefdom.
Well, and it's been interesting to see him, I think, see the writing on the wall for St. Louis. I think he knew he was not going to be running beyond this term, and he has come out and get pretty aggressive about the messaging of, hey, if the city doesn't end up turning things around, growing, the whole region, by the way, St. Louis County, after a long time being flat, it's in decline. There's no question. So he's saying this will infect St. Charles long term. We have a big problem, which has been interesting.
I'm surprised.
15 seconds, Alvin.
I'm surprised he's leaving, and I don't think he's done yet. Steve Ehlmann's got something up his sleeve. I honestly believe that. I do. He was laying a runway for some kind of jet to take off.
I think what he has up his sleeve is writing. Yeah.
Well, let's see what the viewers had to say about last week's program. St. Charles has had a great library system as long as I can remember. It was brought up that this issue was a tempest in a teacup. What was not mentioned is that a huge majority of the 350 people who showed up at the board meeting were there to support the librarian. That from Ellen Zur of St. Charles. Alvin Reid does a great job as Donnybrook provocateur. He manages the direction of discussion topics with humor and intellect while remaining non-confrontational. Thank you, Morris Fletcher of Kirkwood. No argument here. Dan Duncan writes, when it comes to what St. Louis City Aldermen or St. Louis County Council members get paid, it's less an issue of how much they get paid and more about whether they should be in a position to give themselves a raise. Mr. Duncan lives in Calverton Park, and you can write us care of 9PBS. Use that zip code 63108. We love those emails, Donnybrook@9pbs.org. Tweet using hashtag DonnybrookSTL. Call the 9 line, 314-512-9094, and listen to us, as I did this past week, on your favorite podcast source, Apple, Spotify, TuneIn, and Google Play. Thanks so much to Jacob Kirn for sitting in for the vacationing Bill McClellan, who will be back next Thursday, and I hope you're back next Thursday. Until then, have a great week.
Donnybrook is made possible by the support of the Betsy and Thomas Patterson Foundation and the members of 9PBS.